I just finished reading yesterday Ken Follett's latest novel called A Column of Fire. I'm a Ken Follett fan. I've read this now the third series of his edition of his Kingsbridge series. It was 900 pages, and it was just hard to put down because I love how he uses a period of time. He's a historical novelist, and how he creates characters that were living in that time so that you can truly understand what's going on then, and you feel like you're actually a part of it, and you're moving along the journey with these amazing characters that have feelings and lives and families and all sorts of things that we kind of forget about when we just read things in history books. So this particular novel started out about 40 years or so after the Protestant Reformation in Europe began. And I was immediately drawn to the opening words of the book because I remember when I was studying the Protestant Reformation in the second half of the 16th century, back when I was in college and seminary, a couple things really stood out to me. And probably the largest thing was the amount of bloodshed that was spilled during that time. As a kid growing up in the church, I had no idea that in the Protestant Reformation, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of people died. There were many people who were Catholic that believed that Protestantism was a heresy, and they killed thousands of Protestants. And then in regions where Protestantism became the dominant faith, many Catholics were killed. And as I was reading about this way back in college and seminary, I was rather in shock over the fact that people would actually kill other people because of disagreements within the Christian faith. And I was not only shocked, but it really, really bothered me that that was a part of my Christian heritage. So anyway, as I'm considering this, I thought, just this past week, I was remembering my very large, diverse Hawaiian family and the family reunions that I attend on the various islands over here. And once in a while on the mainland, we get together. But mainly, we pick an island, and we all, every several years, we converge on that island. And as I think back over all the family reunions that I've been to and all the people that show up, I think about my relatives who are Protestant, Catholic, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, agnostic, atheist, and probably a whole bunch of other things as well. And to be very frank with you, there are times when people will say things that I find a little off-putting when it comes to religion or judgmental, and once in a while somebody will volunteer to say grace for the entire clan of Akanas, and somebody will say something and I just go, ouch, that just sounded really kind of judgmental, like you're the only one that knows the truth and everybody else is just wrong. And I'm sure I'm the only one here that's ever felt like that at a family reunion. But anyway, as I was reading through this wonderful novel over the last week and a half or so, let me just tell you a little bit about it. The protagonists in the novel are Ned and Marjorie. And I believe it begins in 1558 when they are teenagers. And the book basically winds through their entire lives. Ned and Marjorie are madly in love with each other, crazy in love. However, Ned is from a Protestant family, and guess what? Marjorie's from a Catholic family, and her parents and her brother just said, absolutely not, no way can you marry someone that even has Protestant leanings, even if they attend a Catholic church. And so Marjorie was forced to marry a man she didn't love and she didn't like at all. And Ned went through a good part of his life single because no one compared to Marjorie. Well, eventually, things started happening politically, and Ned was serving Queen Elizabeth in her court, and she basically was, as I'm sure all of you know, Protestant. But what made Queen Elizabeth so unique and different from most of the kings and queens in England before that was that she promoted an idea of tolerance. In other words, you can still have Catholic leanings and not be killed for your faith. I mean, it may not sound very tolerant, but in those days, that was radical. Because in Europe, up until then, if you had a Protestant king or queen, you had to be Protestant. If you had a Catholic king or queen, you had to be Catholic. And there was no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And Queen Elizabeth basically came along and said, I'm tired of the bloodshed. So Ned basically worshiped her because that's what he wanted. He wished he could have been with this woman that he was madly in love with and remained madly in love with throughout his whole life. And yet, because of this divide that the government decided really had to be there, he couldn't be with the woman he loved. So as the book unfolds, Ned served Queen Elizabeth and did all that he could to promote tolerance amongst the religions. Marjorie, on the other hand, she believed just as strongly in tolerance, but the rest of her family didn't. In fact, her brother was the key figure in this book in terms of assassinating Queen Elizabeth. And Marjorie didn't know that until she realized later in the story that she was a part of a plot that went against everything she believed in. Well, those of you that know your history know how it all turns out. Queen Elizabeth was not assassinated. But as I think about this book and how it brought this all to life, it helped it all come to life for me because I'm basically wandering through this incredible period of history with these people that loved each other and yet were separated because of religion. I just felt like we've come a long ways since then. There are many, many countries today where it's okay if you're Catholic or Protestant or Mormon or Jehovah's Witness or agnostic or atheist or whatever, you're not going to be punished for it. But I do think that many of us realize that we still have a long ways to go. People are still persecuted because of their faith, and in this country, I have friends who are Muslim. And as I've gotten to know them and heard their stories about what it's been like recently being Muslim in a country where there is still a lot of hatred towards Muslims, it has pained me because the Muslims that I know are just as peace-loving as I am and have the same feelings of tolerance that I do towards people who want to believe differently. I sometimes look at the big picture and think, wow, when will this ever change? What can we do about it? In this morning's gospel lesson that Kaylee read to us from Luke just a little while ago, Jesus showed up on Easter Day to his disciples, all 11 of them. We know Judas wasn't part of the picture anymore. So he walked into a room where all 11 of them were gathering together in fear because they had been following Jesus, and Jesus was just killed, and most likely they knew that if they got caught, they would probably be killed as well. And Jesus just appears out of nowhere, walks into the room, and do you remember what he said to them? Peace be with you. Peace be with you. Now, I love words. And peace is a word that is just fascinating to me throughout both the Old and New Testaments. This last week, I decided to look at how many times peace showed up in the Gospel of Luke. 13 times. And then I looked at all the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, total 13 times. And I thought, peace was so important to Luke. All the things that Jesus said about peace, Luke just grasped onto. He didn't want to miss a single one of them. And what Luke is doing in his gospel is basically saying, Jesus offers an alternative way of looking at peace than what we've all come to expect and live with. You see, in the first century, Pax Romana, or the peace of Rome, Roman peace, was the peace of the day. And the way that Luke paints a picture of Jesus is basically saying, here's all the ways that we have been told what peace is. Here's the way that the government has told us to understand peace. All of our leaders, Jesus offers us something radically different. According to Pax Romana, peace was for the elite, the small percentage of people that controlled everything. According to Jesus, peace was for everybody, the people at the center of power and the people on the furthest margins. According to Pax Romana, or Roman peace, peace was for the chosen ones, those who were chosen by the gods. Really, nobody else mattered to them because they weren't the chosen ones. And Jesus came along, according to Luke, and said, peace is for the sinners as well as the saints. Peace is for all of us. According to Pax Romana, Roman peace, peace was something that you took from other people by force. There wasn't enough to go around. Either you had peace or they had peace. So whoever was the strongest got to have peace. And the Roman Empire was the strongest ones around at the time, and so they were the ones that had peace. And according to Luke, Jesus said, not according to my way of understanding peace. Peace, according to Jesus, came not from taking it from others, but by recognizing it within yourself and sharing it with others. It was so very, very different. It was like a night and day alternative. What Jesus offered was a night and day alternative to what the Romans were offering all the people. So when Jesus walked into the room to the disciples and said, peace be with you, they knew exactly what kind of peace Jesus was talking about because they had been following him around for years, watching him live out that kind of peace, teaching people about that kind of peace, and feeling that kind of peace within. Peace be with you was an invitation to them to join Jesus in offering the peace from within that came from God to everyone. Not just some, but to everyone. And that's really what the disciples did in those early days. Wasn't easy. According to church tradition, all but the Apostle John died because of promoting their peace, the way of Jesus. But they took that mission seriously. They knew that being at peace and promoting peace was not an easy road. It was going to be hard. It was going to lead to suffering and maybe even death. But they took it seriously enough so that the next generation and the next all did the same thing. And even with amazing persecution from the Roman Empire, the Christian church grew and grew and grew and grew. And then something happened in the 4th century that kind of changed all that again. Constantine became the emperor, and in 325, the year 325, he gathered a bunch of bishops together. In fact, he invited all the Christian bishops, and he had Christian leanings at the time, hadn't been baptized yet, but figured, well, I think we're going to be a Christian empire now. So he got all his bishops together and said, now you guys all agree on what we're all supposed to believe and say and how we're supposed to do it. And so a lot of good things happened during that time, during what is now called the Council of Nicaea, because Nicaea is where they all met. But there was one man there called Arius, and he didn't agree with what the majority agreed upon, and it had to do with the divinity of Jesus. And so basically what happened is Constantine, this emperor that had Christian leanings, basically said to Arius, I'm going to depose you of your bishop, your seat of being bishop. You're no longer bishop, and I'm going to exile you. And so he ended up spending most of the rest of his life in Palestine. And then he said to everybody else, if you find a single written page by Arius, you have to bring it to your church and burn it. And if you're caught having anything that was ever written by Arius, the penalty will be death. And as I was thinking, oh, look what's happening to the Christian church. We're promoting peace and saying to people, it's okay if we don't agree on every single thing. All of a sudden, it seems like we took a big step back in time. And I'm not saying I'm against what's in the Nicene Creed. What I'm against is telling people what they have to believe and telling people what they can and cannot read. Peace be with you was an invitation to stand against that. And there were many Christians throughout the centuries ever since that have said, no, our job is to not tell people what to read and exactly how they have to believe. Our job is to follow Jesus the very best we can, to give our hearts to Jesus, and to understand what it means to serve God, who is love, based on the life of Jesus. There are times when I think, oh my gosh, we have messed it up so many times in such bad ways in the history of the church. Why do we still even bother? And my answer to that comes also from today's scripture, where the disciples, according to Luke, were disbelieving and still wondering. And those are some of my favorite words, my favorite phrase in all of Scripture, disbelieving and still wondering. That's the hope that I hold on to when it comes to peace and the church promoting peace. Sometimes I think, I don't know what a difference I'm going to make today, this week, in my lifetime, to make this a more peaceful world. I don't know what difference our church is going to make. But even in my disbelief, I still wonder. I imagine, and I think about what my life would be like today if I just embraced peace 100% and only had love for other people. And I imagine what this church will continue to be like as it does that very same thing. And I imagine what this island would be like as we do the same thing and we look around us and we think, how can we bring Jesus kind of peace, not the Roman Empire's Pax Romana peace, but Jesus kind of peace that's for everyone? What would this island be like? And what would our young people today be like when they're adults if we really taught them the way of peace as Jesus showed us? And then, of course, I look at our nation, and sometimes I just want to run and bury my head in the ground. And sometimes as I think of world politics and what's gone on in the news this week, with especially what's happening in Syria, there are times where I just have to say, okay, it's hard for me to believe that world peace is possible. But yet I still wonder and imagine what part I can have, what part you can have as a church, what part we can all have together. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about art and beauty and spirituality as it relates to peace. And I've shared with some of you before that I have a spiritual director. Her name is Darlene, and her job, once a month when we meet on the phone, we used to meet in person when I lived in California, but now that I'm here and she's back in the Bay Area, we just talk on the phone, and her job, what I basically pay her for, is to help me to see God in every part of my life. By the way, I'm reminded of today's scripture, how that really is what peace is about. Seeing God in every part of my life and in every part of your life and every part of the lives of the people out there that I may not even like or know, but seeing that God is there as well. Well, Darlene and I meet, like I said, on the phone once a month, and her job is to help me to see God wherever I happen to be in life. And often she'll say things like, well, where do you imagine God is in that? Or where do you see God in those words or in those feelings? Well, several months ago, I was talking to her about my art, and I said, I feel like it's important for me to create art as a way of promoting peace. And yet sometimes I wonder if it really makes that big of a difference. And Darlene listened and asked me questions that made me ponder what life would be like in this world without art, without beautiful singing, beautiful dancing, watercolors, quilts, prayer as an art form, all that you do. And I thought, I think art not only points us to peace, but allows us to feel it in here. It allows peace to be a part of us inside. And so she invited me to think about my art, the flowers of Hawaii that I paint, and what difference that might make. And I thought, well, there's something about beauty that if we can appreciate the beauty of creation, there's something about that that just helps us to feel at peace and to want to be more peaceful. And if that was the only reason alone that I painted, that would be good enough. But I also think that the reason I paint the flowers of Hawaii is because so many of these precious jewels that are found nowhere else on earth are going to be forgotten unless people like me paint them, unless people like National Tropical Botanical Gardens saves them and takes pictures of them and shows them to the world, another art form. Darlene, later that week, after I had a wonderful conversation about art, she wrote me an email. And in the email, she said these words: "The divine calls us to bring our art, whether it's sacred listening or painting flora, to the world. We are called to bring peace, to wage peace with our art." And as I read that, I thought, I'm glad I'm still painting. And then there's an insert, I believe, in your bulletins. It says Peace Warrior at the top. And Darlene also sent me this, a picture of this woman as a peace warrior. And I asked a little bit more about her. And so Darlene told me that this is a painting by Irene Hardwick Olivieri, which is a friend of her pastor's. And Irene was once listening to NPR, and lo and behold, as she was listening, William Bratton, the ex-police chief of Los Angeles, was being interviewed, and he talked about when he put on his uniform, there was something about that. It made him feel ready for his job. Just putting on a uniform transformed him so he was the chief of police. And it kind of was just a symbol. Well, it was just a symbol. It's just clothes. But that clothing made him somehow think, now I'm ready to do my job. And so she was wondering, I wonder if I, as an artist, had a uniform, what that would look like. And as you look at this picture, it's kind of a warrior's outfit. But the weapons are all things that you use for art. There are all kinds and shapes and sizes of brushes and watercolor tubes and scissors and, I assume, paper and canvas. And then she also says that around her neck and her arms there's a necklace and bracelet with charms that all represent the art that she was working on at the time, or possibly the art that she just finished. And she said, like a soldier or a scout with badges of past experiences, triumphs, this is what I wear. And as I saw this peace warrior, the actual title is Better is the Ready. That's what Irene named her piece. But when Darlene put at the top of the email, peace warrior, she wanted me to see myself as a peace warrior, someone who is ready, prepared, and dressed for battle, but not battle of any kind of violence. Dressed and ready to show the world what peace looks like to me. And as I had pondered this over the last couple of months, I thought, I want to share this with the congregation at some point, this picture, because It's such a rich picture to me of an artist, and I can identify with it. But this week, as I was thinking about all of you who I know, each and every one of you is an artist in one way or another. And as Darlene and I have talked about prayer as an art form, and flower arranging, and guided meditation, and lay making, and dance, and music, in one way or another, God has gifted each and every one of us to be a peace warrior, to be a person who can create something within or around, and therefore, and thereby, make more peace. First of all, to feel more peace, and then to share it with others. At the close of most of our services, we say, "Peace be with you." And I hope today, when you say, "Peace be with you," you will truly think about peace as an art form, as a way of life, and as an alternative to the ways of peace that really aren't peace at all. Peace be with you.
And also